A woman sits in a dead car in an empty parking lot in Boston at 2 in the morning. Snow's building on the windshield. The heater's broken. She's got no coat because it's wrapped around the 3-year-old sleeping in the back seat. Small fingers curled around a stuffed bear with one ear missing. Breathing slowly, trusting completely. The woman's name is Vivienne, and in her lap, there's a black leather briefcase that doesn't belong to her. She found it an hour ago behind a dumpster. There was blood on the ground next to it. Not a lot, but enough. Inside, $85,000 in cash, a loaded gun, and something else. Something small. Something she doesn't understand yet, but someone out there would kill to get back. Her stomach's empty. Her daughter hasn't eaten since noon. One choice in their suffering ends tonight. Nobody saw her. Nobody would ever know. She looks at the money. Then she looks at her daughter in the mirror. She closes the briefcase. Not to keep it, to return it. Her mother once told her, "Vivienne, hunger won't kill you, but losing who you are will." Some things are heavier than hunger, but what she doesn't know, what she can't possibly know, is that across Boston, in a glass tower overlooking the harbor, a man's already awake, already quiet, already dangerous. His name is Grayson Mercer, and he doesn't lose things. He takes them back. Hit like if you're already hooked. Share this with someone who needs it tonight. And subscribe because I promise you, you're not ready for where this goes. Now let's go back to the night that broke her. Vivienne Cross was 28 years old, but her eyes were far older than that number. They had seen too many things no one at 28 should ever have to carry. Too many doors slammed shut, too many backs turned on her, too many mornings when the city of Boston woke up, loud, busy, and utterly indifferent to the fact that she and her daughter had nowhere to go. But it hadn't always been that way. 5 years earlier, Vivienne was 23, studying in a nursing program at a community college in Portland, Maine. She wasn't the best student in her class, but she was the hardest working one. Her clinical instructor once told her that she had steady hands and observant eyes, the kind of person born to care for other people. Then she met Travis Wyatt. He was 27, a police officer, with a wide smile and a voice that knew how to make a room fall quiet when he walked into it. He held doors open for her. He called her special on their very first date. He said things no one had ever said to her before. Things like, "I'll never let anyone hurt you," and "You're everything I need." She believed him. She believed him because she wanted to, because her mother was gravely ill at the time and she was lonely, and he appeared at the exact moment when she needed someone beside her most. They were married after 4 months, so quickly that her friends didn't even have time to say anything. So quickly that by the time they wanted to speak, it was already too late. Travis wanted the wedding fast. Later, she understood why. Because control has to begin with ownership. 2 months after the wedding, she found out she was pregnant. Travis told her to quit school. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. "You don't need a degree. You have me." So she quit. She had only 1 semester left before graduation. 1 semester. She carried that with her like an unhealed cut through all the years that followed. Then everything began to change. Not all at once. The worst things rarely arrive all at once. It started with his voice. Travis didn't like the way she spoke to store clerks. Travis didn't like her wearing that shirt outside. Travis didn't like her talking to her mother on the phone for too long. Then the voice became the pounding of a fist on the table. The pounding on the table became a fist driving into the wall beside her head. And the wall beside her head became her. The first time he hit her, she was 7 months pregnant. Her belly was full and heavy. Her legs were swollen. Dinner was 15 minutes late because her back hurt too badly for her to stand. He knocked the plate onto the floor, grabbed her by the hair, yanked her head back, and said in a very calm voice, "Don't ever make me wait." She didn't tell anyone. She didn't know who she could tell. Her friends were gone from her life. Her mother was in the hospital. And Travis was a police officer, the man everyone in the neighborhood called the nice guy. No one would believe her. She knew that before she ever tried. Ruthie was born on a night in November, tiny, wide-eyed. Her first cry rang through the delivery room, and Vivienne held her against her chest and thought, "Now I have a reason to endure all of this." And she did endure it. She carried the fear every time Travis opened the front door and came home. She carried the silence every time he screamed in her face in front of the baby. She carried the bruises she hid beneath long sleeves in the middle of summer. She carried the smile she forced onto her face whenever a neighbor asked, Everything all right? She carried all of it, alone. Because Travis didn't just hit her. He isolated her. He erased her friends' phone numbers. He checked her messages. He checked the mileage on the car. She wasn't allowed to go out without a reason. Wasn't allowed to talk to anyone for too long. Wasn't allowed to look at anyone for too long. Vivian's world kept shrinking and shrinking until all that was left was 4 walls, 1 child, and a man she had once believed would protect her. Then her mother died. Vivian wasn't allowed to be there. Her mother had fought lung cancer for 2 years without insurance, scrubbing hospital floors until her body could no longer endure it, and she died alone in a hospital room in Portland at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Vivian learned the news through a call from the night nurse. She begged Travis to let her go. He said no. Not because he had a reason, but because he could say no. Because power lived there, in the ability to deny a daughter one last chance to see her mother's face and know that she wouldn't dare argue back. She didn't go. She sat in the bathroom at midnight, turned on the faucet so the running water would drown out the sound of her crying, and promised herself that one day she would visit her mother's grave. She still hasn't done it. Ruthie was 1 year old then. The little girl was beginning to walk, beginning to say her first few words, and beginning to fall silent whenever Travis's voice rose louder than usual. Children learn faster than adults think. They don't need to understand the words to understand danger. Ruthie learned that when the front door flew open with a violent slam, she should sit still. Not move, not make a sound. 1.5 years old, and she already knew how to protect herself by becoming invisible. Then Travis was thrown off the police force. It was an excessive force case. Violence used far beyond what was necessary while arresting an unarmed suspect. There was camera footage. There were witnesses. The Portland Police Department couldn't protect him anymore. He lost his badge, lost his service weapon, lost the identity he had used to hide his true nature for all those years. And when a man like Travis loses the one thing that makes him feel powerful outside the house, he makes up for it by tightening his power inside it. Inside those 4 walls, over the only woman who couldn't leave. After that, the violence was no longer anger. It became a schedule. It became routine. Vivian could count it. Tuesdays and Fridays were usually the worst, because those were the 2 days he drank the most. She learned how to prepare. Put Ruthie to sleep early. Have dinner ready on time. Don't look him in the eye once he was past his 4th drink. But there were nights no preparation could save her from. The last night was one of them. Ruthie was 2 years old. Travis came home after midnight, drunk enough that he couldn't walk straight, but still sober enough to look for a reason. Dirty dishes in the sink. That was all. 2 bowls and 1 plate. He dragged Vivian out of bed by her hair, shoved her into the kitchen wall, and slammed her head against the tile. Not once. Vivian saw blood on the white tile before she felt the pain, and then she heard something that made everything stop. Not crying. Silence. Ruthie was standing in the bedroom doorway, 2 years old, barefoot, her curly hair tangled, clutching a teddy bear with 1 ear missing. And she wasn't crying, wasn't screaming, wasn't shaking. She was only standing there and watching, with eyes far too quiet, far too knowing for a child of 2. Eyes that had seen this scene enough times to understand that crying wouldn't change anything. Vivian looked at her daughter, and what broke inside her wasn't bone. It was the last thing that had still been keeping her there. She realized that she wasn't afraid Travis would kill her. She was afraid Ruthie would grow up believing this was normal, that love looked like this, that sitting in silence in a corner was the way a child was supposed to live. That night, when Travis passed out on the sofa, Vivian picked up Ruthie, stuffed the teddy bear into her handbag, took the keys to the old Honda Civic, and drove away without looking back. No money, no documents, because Travis kept all of them. No phone. Just a car, a child, and the darkness on the highway at 3 o'clock in the morning. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away. 3 days later, Travis woke up, realized she was gone, and called an old friend who was still with the Portland Police Department. He reported that Vivian had kidnapped his daughter, that she was mentally unstable, that the child was in danger. His friend helped file a missing persons report for Ruthie. Vivian's name was entered into the system, not as a victim, as a suspect. From that night on, Vivian didn't dare step into any place connected to a system. Not a shelter, not a clinic, not a support agency, because every time her name was entered into a database, Travis would know where she was. She drove south from Portland, through New Hampshire, through Massachusetts. She stopped in Boston because the car ran out of gas near Dorchester, and she had no money left to buy more. Boston didn't welcome her. Boston doesn't welcome anyone. That city doesn't welcome. It simply absorbs. 1 year. She lived in that car for 1 year, washing dishes for restaurants that paid cash, cleaning laundromats, any job that didn't ask for her real name, didn't ask for papers, didn't ask why. Ruthie grew up in the back seat of that Honda. She learned how to sleep sitting up, learned how to eat from cans, learned not to ask, "Where's our home?" because she already understood that there are questions whose answers would only make her mother sad. That night, the night she found the briefcase, Vivienne had parked in the rear lot of the Stop and Shop on Adams Street in Dorchester since 9 o'clock in the evening. This was one of the parking lots she had memorized after a year of living on the road. The supermarket closed at 10 o'clock. The last employees left at 10:30. And around 1 o'clock, when the lot was completely empty and the city had fallen into a deep silence, she would go out back to where the large dumpsters stood beside the warehouse door and search, not for trash, for food, bread that expired that very day, yogurt cups with dented lids, fruit bruised in places the store could no longer sell. She had learned the pattern. Tuesdays and Fridays were the days they cleared the shelves. That night was Friday. Ruthie was asleep in the back seat. Vivienne locked the car, checked the mirror twice, then walked quickly toward the back of the supermarket. Wind off the harbor cut through the 2 thin layers of clothing on her body. The ground was covered in a fresh layer of snow, light but thick enough for every footstep to leave a mark. She reached the first dumpster, lifted the lid, black plastic bags, the smell of old food, nothing usable. The second dumpster was the same. She moved to the third one, the farthest away, near the back corner wall of the loading area, where the streetlight didn't quite reach, and that was when she saw it. Not inside the dumpster, on the ground beside it, as if someone had thrown it down or dropped it in a hurry. A black leather briefcase. She almost walked past it. She was tired. Her back had been aching since morning because she had slept sitting up for 3 nights in a row. But then she looked down and saw something else on the snow. A dark stain spread across the white ground. Not much, but she knew what blood looked like. She had seen her own blood on white tile enough times to recognize it. She stood still for 10 seconds, listening. Wind. The sound of cars far away on the main road. No one. She bent down and picked up the briefcase. Heavy. Real leather. Metal clasp. The kind of case she had never touched in her life. She carried it back to the car, locked the doors, checked that Ruthie was still sleeping. Then she opened it. The first thing she saw was money. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled, wrapped in rubber bands. She didn't count it right away. She didn't need to count to know it was more than anything she had ever held in her hands. More than a year's rent. More than the tuition for the 1 nursing semester she had never been allowed to finish. Beneath the money was a gun. A Beretta, black, cold. She didn't know much about guns, but she knew enough to recognize that it was loaded, because Travis used to keep guns in the house, and she had learned how to check while he slept, just to know whether it was dangerous for Ruthie. Beside the gun was a small black USB drive, with no label, and in the side compartment, a watch. Expensive. She could tell that from the weight of it and the way the light caught on the face. She turned it over. On the back were 3 letters engraved deep into the metal. M.M.H. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew the owner of this briefcase wasn't an ordinary man. Ordinary men didn't carry $85,000 in cash with a loaded gun, and that blood out there wasn't from an accident. She sat in the car for a long time. Her hand rested on the stacks of money. She could feel the thickness of it beneath her fingers. $85,000. A newer car with a heater that worked. A small apartment with a door that locked. Food for Ruthie every day, not from dumpsters. A new coat. New shoes. A real bed. She could take the money right then, leave the briefcase behind, and drive away before sunrise. No one had seen her. No one would know. Her hand tightened. Then she looked up into the rearview mirror. Ruthie was sleeping. Her little fingers curled around the ear of her teddy bear. Her lips slightly parted. Completely unaware. Completely trusting her. And Vivienne thought of her mother. Not the mother lying in a hospital bed. The mother standing in other people's kitchens at 5 o'clock in the morning, scrubbing floors. never once taking a single pill that wasn't hers, even when her back hurt so badly she couldn't sleep. The mother who had once held her hand when she was 12 and said, "Vivian, hunger won't kill you, but losing yourself will." She looked at the money one last time, then she closed the briefcase. Gently, carefully, like closing a door she knew she wouldn't open again. She set the briefcase on the floor by the passenger seat, pulled the thin blanket up to her chest, leaned the seat back, and closed her eyes. Her stomach was still empty. The wind was still blowing through the crack in the car door. Snow was still falling, but inside that dead car, in that frozen parking lot in Dorchester, a woman had made a choice no one saw, no one knew about, and no one would ever stand up and applaud. Tomorrow morning she would find the address. She would return it. But while Vivian closed her eyes in that car, on the other side of Boston, in a glass tower overlooking the harbor, a man was already awake, already dangerous, and already beginning the hunt. Grayson Mercer didn't sleep. Not tonight. Not on most nights. He stood at the window of the penthouse on the 32nd floor in the Seaport District at 3 o'clock in the morning, one hand holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, his eyes fixed on Boston Harbor below. Container ships lay still beneath yellow lights. The water was black and flat. The city slept beneath him, but he didn't, because Grayson Mercer hadn't slept well since the night he was 19 years old. That night in North End, 17 years ago, his father, Harrison Mercer, had just finished dinner at a restaurant on Hanover Street. An ordinary dinner. Pasta, red wine, a conversation about plans to expand the shipping routes farther south. Grayson was sitting in the back seat of the car. His father was in the front. The driver had just started the engine. Then the window beside the driver's seat shattered. Not one shot. 3. One after another. The driver collapsed over the steering wheel. His father fell sideways, reaching one hand toward the back, toward Grayson, as if the last instinct of a dying man was to shield his son. Grayson didn't scream. He didn't run. He climbed over the seat, crawled into the front, and pressed both hands against his father's chest. Blood. Hot. Heavy. Pouring through his fingers faster than anything he could stop. His father looked at him. His eyes were still open, still clear. And he said one sentence, the last one, in a voice Grayson would hear in his head every night for the next 17 years. "Don't let them change who you are." Then his eyes closed. Grayson pressed harder, shouted for help, pressed harder still, but his father was gone. When the police arrived, they had to pull Grayson out of the car. His hands were still pressed against his father's chest. The blood stayed dry on his skin for 2 days because he refused to wash it off. The scar on his left wrist didn't come from a knife or a bullet. It came from shattered glass that night. He never removed it, never hid it. It was there every time he rolled up his sleeves, every time he signed a contract, every time he made a decision no one else dared make. It reminded him of the cost. After the funeral, the Mercer family fell into chaos. Harrison Mercer hadn't only been the head of the family. He had been the man who held everything together, the single thread stretched between violence and order. Without him, the factions inside began pulling away from one another. Some wanted to sell territory to Salazar in New York. Some wanted to break everything apart. Some wanted to disappear and keep their peace. Grayson was 19. No one thought he was strong enough. He didn't think so either. But he remembered his father's last words, and he remembered pressing his hands against his father's chest and still failing to save him. He wasn't going to lose anything else. For 3 years, he watched, learned, and waited. He learned how to read people, learned how to stay silent at the right moment, learned how to tell the difference between loyalty and calculation. When he was 22, he took over. Not through violence. Through a meeting that lasted 7 hours in the basement beneath the old restaurant in North End, the place where his father had eaten his last meal. Grayson sat at the head of the table, said little, listened more. And by the time it ended, everyone in that room understood that Harrison Mercer's son wasn't a copy of his father. He was a more dangerous version, because his father had ruled through respect. Grayson ruled through precision. 14 years later, the Mercer family was no longer the crude, violent organization his father had left behind. Grayson turned it into Mercer Maritime Holdings. Legitimate on the outside. Logistics, maritime shipping, port real estate. Inside, control of the entire shipping corridor from Boston to New York. Everything moving through the port passed through his hands, and anything that should never appear on paper never did. He wasn't a good man. He had never claimed to be a good man, but he had a boundary. One single boundary, non-negotiable, without exception, never to be crossed. No women, no children. His father had taught him that not with words, but through the way he lived. Harrison Mercer had once thrown one of his own men out of the family in the middle of the night because the man beat his wife. He had once stopped a deal worth $2 million after discovering that a business partner was using child labor at a southern port. His father believed that power without limits wasn't power at all. It was the loss of control. Grayson held on to that. Anyone who violated it, he dealt with personally. He didn't hand it off to someone else. Didn't work through intermediaries. It was the only principle in Grayson Mercer's world that functioned like morality. And tonight, standing before the window at 3 o'clock in the morning, cold whiskey in his hand, he wasn't thinking about money or territory or power. He was thinking about the briefcase lying somewhere out there in the dark city, and about the thing inside it that had the power to destroy everything his father had died to build. That briefcase wasn't just money and a gun. If that had been all it was, Grayson wouldn't have been standing awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. Money can be replaced. A gun can be replaced. But the USB drive inside that briefcase couldn't. 8 months earlier, Grayson had started noticing numbers that didn't match. Not major discrepancies. Small things. A container shipment listed as departing from Boston, but the ship's GPS showed that it had stopped in Newark 2 days before reaching the destination written on the paperwork. A payment to a subcontractor that no one in the finance department remembered approving. A shipping route changed at the last minute, with no reason recorded in the file. Taken separately, each thing could have been explained. But Grayson hadn't built an empire by accepting explanations. He had built it by asking questions, until there was nowhere left to hide. He began investigating alone. He told no one. He used no one inside the Mercer family. He hired an outside forensic accountant, paid in cash, met in places without cameras. The results came back in fragments over the course of many months, and every fragment pointed in the same direction. Someone inside Mercer Maritime was selling shipping routes to Jorge Salazar in New York. Salazar was a rival. Not the kind of rival found in business competition. The kind who, if he had enough information about Mercer's routes and schedules, could swallow the Port of Boston whole without firing a single shot. All he needed to know was where the cargo was going, when it was moving, and through whose hands it passed. And someone was selling him exactly that. The money from selling the information didn't move directly. It passed through 3 shell companies registered in Delaware, the kind of companies that exist only on paper, with no office, no employees, only a bank account. Over 3 years, $4.2 million had moved through that system. Grayson stored all of it on the USB drive, encrypted it, kept it with him, never copied it, because the man he suspected wasn't an enemy outside the family. It was Brennan Holt, his second in command. The man who had been with the Mercer family since Grayson was a boy of 15. The man his father had trusted. The man Grayson had called brother for 21 years. If Brennan knew Grayson had evidence, everything would disappear in a single night. The data would be erased. The shell companies would be shut down. And Brennan would know he was being watched, which meant he would act first. In this world, acting first meant a bullet or a knife before the other man ever had the chance to turn around. That was why Grayson kept the USB drive in the briefcase, carried it on his person, never let it out of his sight, until last night. Last night he had a meeting in Dorchester. A source inside Salazar's organization had reached out through an intermediary, saying there was more information, the name of the Mercer contact Salazar was using. Grayson went alone, with only his driver waiting outside. The meeting was set in the alley behind a closed laundromat, 3 blocks from the supermarket parking lot. The source never came. Instead, 2 men stepped out from the far end of the alley. Grayson recognized the trap before they had time to draw their guns. He dealt with the first man in 3 seconds. The second ran. But as Grayson turned, the briefcase slipped from his hand. He heard his driver lay on the horn, saw the headlights sweep into the alley, and he had to choose, the briefcase or his life. He chose his life. When he came back 15 minutes later, the briefcase was gone. All that remained was the blood of the ambusher on the snow and a set of small, light footprints, not a man's. Grayson stood there for a long time, staring at those footprints. Someone had come there after him. Someone had picked up the briefcase containing evidence that could destroy the Mercer family. He returned to the tower at 2 o'clock in the morning. Petra Voss was already there. She was always there when he needed her. 45 years old, former military, with a face that never revealed more than it had to. She was the only person in that building Grayson trusted completely, because she wasn't loyal to money or power. She had been loyal first to his father, and now she was loyal to him, because she had promised a dying man in a car that she would keep his son safe. The footprints at the scene, Petra said. Small, worn shoes, not professional. Could have been a homeless person who picked it up. Grayson didn't turn to look at her. He kept staring out at the harbor through the glass. Find them, he said, before anyone else does. The next morning, Vivienne woke at 6 o'clock inside the snow-covered car. Ruthie was still asleep. The briefcase was still on the floor beneath the passenger seat, exactly where she had left it the night before. She looked at it for a moment, then out through the glass. Boston was waking up, gray, cold, indifferent. She needed to find out what those 3 letters meant. MMH, the Boston Public Library on Boylston Street, opened at 9 o'clock. She knew because she had used the restroom there many times over the past year. She picked Ruthie up, carried the briefcase, and walked 40 minutes through the wind. Ruthie didn't ask where they were going. She was used to moving without knowing the destination. Inside the library, Vivienne sat Ruthie down in the children's section with a few board books, then took a seat at a public computer. She typed MMH Boston. The first result was Mercer Maritime Holdings, headquarters in the financial district, Boston. She clicked. The website was polished, with photographs of a glass tower and the executive board. CEO, Grayson Mercer. A portrait, black suit, a face that wasn't smiling. She looked at that photograph longer than she needed to. Not because he was handsome or because she was impressed, but because the eyes in that picture looked like hers, the kind of eyes that had seen something they could never forget. She wrote down the address on a small scrap of paper, shut the computer down, picked Ruthie up, and headed to the bus stop. Bus number 7. She used the last coins in her coat pocket, literally. After that ride, she had no money left to go anywhere at all. The Mercer Maritime Holdings building was taller than anything Vivienne had ever stood in front of. Glass, steel, light reflecting everywhere. 2 security guards at the entrance looked at her from 50 meters away. Worn shoes, thin coat, child in her arms. They didn't need to say anything. Their faces said it all. I need to see Mr. Grayson Mercer, Vivienne said. Her voice was steady. I have something that belongs to him. They looked at each other. One of them told her to wait. 5 minutes, then 10. Ruthie began to shiver from the cold. Vivienne pulled her coat tighter around her daughter, the only coat she had and the one she should have been wearing herself. Then a side door opened. A middle-aged woman with short hair and a sharp face led her inside. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask Vivienne's name. She only said, "Follow me." The lobby inside was warm. Ruthie let out a small breath when the heat touched her skin. Marble floors, high ceilings, the scent of coffee and leather. A different world. And in the middle of the lobby, a man was already standing there. Not sitting, standing, as if he had been too restless to sit. Grayson Mercer looked like the photograph online, and nothing like it at all. The picture had captured the lines of him, the shoulders, the jaw, the precision in the way he carried himself. But it hadn't captured the intensity, the sleepless eyes, the deliberate stillness of a man who controlled everything around him by refusing any unnecessary movement. The sleeves of his black shirt were rolled up, revealing a long scar on his left wrist. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then she stepped forward, set the briefcase on the table between them, and said, I found this. I believe it belongs to you. He didn't move. 2 seconds. Then he stepped forward, opened the briefcase, checked it quickly but thoroughly, and closed it again. His eyes came back to her. You walked here, he said. Not a question. In this weather. With a child. Yes. There's $85,000 in this case. I know. I counted it, and I brought it back. Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind of silence a man falls into when he's recalculating everything he thought he knew about human beings. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a thick envelope, the kind of thickness that told you what was inside without needing to open it. Take it, he said. No. The word left her mouth before she had time to think. One of his eyebrows shifted. It's a reward. I didn't return it for a reward. Then why did you return it? She looked straight into his eyes. Because I have a daughter. And one day she's going to ask me who I am. I need to have an answer I'm not ashamed of. The room went very still. Somewhere near the row of chairs, Ruthie was softly singing some little tune to her teddy bear. Grayson lowered the envelope, slowly. What kind of work do you do? He asked. Anything honest. I can clean, organize files, do administrative support. I learn fast. I don't complain. I just need fair pay and a warm place for my daughter while I work. He looked at her for a long time. Most people standing where she stood would have asked for money. She was asking for dignity. Come back here tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, he said. See Petra at reception. She'll arrange it. Vivian let out a breath. Lightly. Just enough. Thank you. He nodded once. She turned away, lifting Ruthie into her arms. And as she reached the door, she heard him speak quietly behind her, almost as if he were speaking to himself. You took a bus here to return $85,000. She stopped at the door without turning back. My mother went farther than that every day just to feed us, she said softly. This is nothing. She carried Ruthie outside, into the Boston cold, and for the first time in a year, she felt that cold wasn't swallowing her whole. Comment right now, if you were in her position, holding $85,000 in cash, with a hungry daughter, no home, and no one knowing, would you return it? Honestly, I want to know. But she thought returning the briefcase was the end of the story. It was only the beginning, because someone inside that building had seen her on the security cameras, had heard her name, and had decided that a homeless woman who knew where the briefcase had been knew far too much to be left in peace. The next morning, Vivian arrived at Mercer Maritime Holdings at 6:45, 15 minutes early. She had learned that showing up early was the only thing in life that cost nothing and still carried value. Ruthie in her arms, the one-eared teddy bear in the little girl's hand, the two of them stood before the glass tower in the gray light of a January morning in Boston. Yesterday, she had walked into this place like someone searching for directions. Today, she walked in like someone beginning again. It was a different feeling. Heavier, because beginning again meant there was now something to lose. The morning lobby was nothing like it had been before. Employees moved quickly. Access cards flashed one after another. The air smelled of coffee, and the sharp sound of heels struck against the stone floor. Everything was clean, precise, and purposeful. Vivian looked down at her shoes. The soles were worn thin, the toes scuffed, wet with snow. She looked at her clothes. 2 thin layers she had washed in the sink of a public restroom the night before and hung over the car door to dry overnight. This was the best she had. She lifted her head and stepped toward the reception desk. Petra Voss was already standing there, the same woman who had led her inside the day before. This morning she wore a dark gray suit jacket, her short hair neat, her face carrying no expression beyond efficiency. She handed Vivian a plastic badge with a quickly taken photograph and a name printed beneath it. No handshake. No welcome. Administrative support. 3rd floor. Report to Mr. Fenwick. She held out the badge without looking Vivian in the eye. Then she looked at Ruthie. And for one very brief moment, so brief that anyone not paying attention would have missed it, something softer moved across her face. Follow me, Petra said. She led the two of them down a hallway on the ground floor, past the storage area, to a door at the very end. Inside was a small room, warm and clean, in a plain, unadorned way. A soft rug covered the floor. A few old but well-kept toys were arranged neatly on a low shelf. There was a small table with crayons and paper, and an older woman with silver hair pinned up high and a round face was sitting in an armchair reading a book. She looked up when the door opened, and her smile was the warmest thing Vivian had felt anywhere in this building. This is Mrs. Calloway, Petra said. She'll watch Ruthie during work hours. Mrs. Calloway rose to her feet without hurry and bent down to Ruthie's eye level. Hello, sweetheart. What's your name? Ruthie looked at her. Looked at her mother. Looked back at the woman. Ruthie, she said softly. Ruthie. What a beautiful name. Would you like to see how many crayons we have in here? Ruthie didn't answer at once. She turned and looked back at Vivian, with the same eyes Vivian had seen hundreds of times over the past year. Eyes that asked without asking. Will you be here? Will you come back? Is this safe? Vivian knelt down, She took Ruthie's 2 small hands in her own. "Mom's right upstairs. I promise." Ruthie studied her mother for a long moment. A 3-year-old face, but eyes older than that by far. Then she nodded. One small, serious nod, as if she were signing an agreement she understood far better than any 3-year-old ever should. Then Ruthie turned, walked into the room, and made her way toward the shelf of crayons. 3 years old, and she already knew how to be brave. Vivian stood. Her throat was tight, but she didn't let it show. Not here. Not on the first day. Petra led her up to the 3rd floor in the elevator. The hallway was long, lined with glass, lit by white overhead lights. Employees moved back and forth carrying badges and tablets, with the faces of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Vivian didn't have that face, and she knew everyone could see it. Mr. Fenwick stood at the end of the hall in front of a door with no nameplate. He was about 55, thin, straight-backed, with the face of a man who had managed paperwork for 30 years and believed paperwork mattered more than people. He looked Vivian up and down without bothering to hide that he was evaluating her, and the result of that evaluation was clearly not a generous one. File sorting. Records inventory. Nothing else. Don't touch anything except what you're instructed to handle. Yes, sir. He opened the door. The records room lay behind it, and the moment Vivian stepped inside, she understood why no one wanted to work there. The room was long, narrow, windowless, with fluorescent lights flickering in the far corner. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with file boxes, cardboard cartons, and briefcases stacked in no order any ordinary person could have recognized. Dust lay over the boxes on the highest shelves, the smell of old paper and air trapped too long in one place. 3 years of records left unsorted, maybe more. Vivian stood there, taking in the room. Then she removed her thin outer layer, hung it over the back of the only chair in the room, and began to work. From the left corner, first shelf, first box, she didn't need anyone to tell her where to start. She was used to finding order for herself in the middle of chaos. She had been doing that for a year inside a dead Honda in Dorchester. Rumors spread faster than the elevators in that building. Before noon on her first day, the entire 3rd floor knew. Before the end of the 2nd day, the whole building knew. The woman the boss had personally hired. From the street, without an interview, without human resources, without any of the procedures everyone else had to go through. Vivian heard all of it, not because they hid it, but because they didn't bother to. The whispers in the coffee area stopped when she walked past, then started again the moment she was gone. The looks in the elevator dropped to her shoes and then shifted away. The way people edged a little farther off when she sat down at a lunch table in the canteen. Not obvious, but obvious enough. She said nothing. She came early, stayed late, and worked. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, 2 women appeared in the doorway of the records room. One had brown hair, careful makeup, and a cup of coffee in her hand that she wasn't drinking, only holding so she'd have something to do. The other was blonde, with a wide smile, the kind of smile that had teeth but no warmth. "So you're the one," the brunette said. Vivian looked up from the stack of files. "The one Mr. Mercer hired personally." The blonde laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't really laughter. "I was assigned to this department by his assistant," Vivian said, her voice even. "Same thing." The brunette looked her up and down, slowly, measuring. "You do know people are going to talk, right? People talk when they don't have anything more useful to do." Vivian replied. Then she turned back to the stack of files. The 2 women stood there for a few more seconds, waiting for some kind of reaction, a crack, some anger, some confusion they could carry away and repeat to someone else. But Vivian gave them nothing. They left. She let out a breath, slowly, then kept working. By the end of the first week, Vivian had sorted the entire vendor contract archive from 3 years earlier, arranged by date, by code, by shipping route. The records room was beginning to look as if someone had actually worked there for the first time in years, and it was in the middle of that sorting that she saw something that didn't match. 3 shipping manifests, the same container number, but 3 different destinations listed across 3 separate sets of documents. The first set said Boston to Savannah. The second set showed that same container from Boston to Newark. The third set, with that same container number, said Boston to Charleston. The declared weight didn't match either. The first set said 12 tons. The second said 18 tons. The third said 14. The same container couldn't weigh 3 different amounts and travel to 3 different destinations. Vivienne didn't know what it meant. She didn't understand logistics or maritime shipping or anything else that happened outside this records room. But she knew how to count. And she knew when numbers were lying. She took out the small notebook she always carried, the one she had used all through the past year, to write down everything: cash-paid work schedules, expiration dates on food at the supermarket, how much money was left in her pocket. And she wrote it down. Container number, date, destination, weight, all 3 sets. She didn't report it to anyone. Not yet. She just wrote it down and kept working. She had lived long enough in a world where no one protected her to know that when you find something that isn't right, you don't shout. You write it down. You stay quiet. And you wait until you know who you can trust. That afternoon, Vivienne was pushing a cart of files down the hallway on the 3rd floor when she felt someone watching her. Not the kind of stare from curious employees or from the 2 women the day before. A different kind. Heavier. She turned her head. A man was standing at the far end of the hall, 40 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark gray suit, with the kind of face that might once have been pleasant 10 years ago, but now held nothing but calculation. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't say a word. He only stood there and watched her all the way down the hall until she turned into the elevator. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Who is she? Brennan Holt wasn't asking because he didn't know. He was asking because he knew far too well. He had watched the security footage from the morning before. He had seen the woman in the thin coat carrying a child into the lobby and setting the black leather briefcase on the table in front of Grayson. The briefcase that should have vanished forever on the night of the ambush in Dorchester. The briefcase Brennan had paid a great deal to make sure Grayson would never recover, and now it had come back, returned by a homeless woman no one had invited. That woman had held the USB drive in her hands. Maybe she had opened it. Maybe she had seen it. Maybe she hadn't understood any of it. But maybe it was something Brennan Holt didn't accept. The small studio sat in a low-rise building near the harbor, a 15-minute walk from Mercer Maritime. Petra handed her the key that afternoon without much explanation. Company owned, for employees who need temporary housing. 1 room, a small kitchen, a bathroom, a single bed with white sheets and a thin pillow. Nothing on the walls, no curtains, only a plastic roll-down shade. But when Vivienne opened the door and stepped inside, the warmth from the old heater touched her face, and she had to stand still for a moment. Warmth. 4 walls. A door with a lock. She set Ruthie down. The little girl stood in the middle of the room, looking around with eyes that for the past year had known only the back seat of a car and dark parking lots. Then Ruthie looked up at her mother and said, "Is it ours, Mama?" Vivienne didn't answer right away because she didn't trust her voice then. She nodded. That night she bathed Ruthie. Hot water. For the first time in 3 months. For the past 3 months, she had wiped Ruthie down with wet cloths in public restrooms, with cold water from a gas station tap, with whatever she could find. But tonight there was hot water, running from the faucet, steaming, warm. She filled the tub, set Ruthie in it, and Ruthie touched the surface of the water with her hand, felt the warmth rising from it, and smiled, not a loud smile, a small, startled smile, as if she had just discovered that the world still contained something gentle she had almost forgotten. Vivienne watched her daughter smile in that warm bath, then she turned her face away, and cried, soundlessly. She hadn't cried in months, had thought she was past that stage, but the hot water against her daughter's skin broke something open that she had believed was sealed shut. She cried from relief. She cried from anger. She cried because a 3-year-old child was smiling at being bathed in warm water, and that should have been ordinary, but for them it felt like a miracle. She wiped her eyes before Ruthie turned to look at her. Wipe them clean. Done. She lifted Ruthie out, dried her off, dressed her in clean pajamas that Mrs. Calloway had quietly slipped into her bag that afternoon, and laid her on the bed. Ruthie fell asleep within 2 minutes, on a real bed, under a real blanket, in a room with 4 walls and a door that locked. The one-eared teddy bear was tucked between her chin and chest. Vivienne sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, and watched her sleep for a long time. On the other side of the city, on the 32nd floor of the Seaport Tower, Grayson Mercer sat before the security monitors in his private office at 10 o'clock that night. He hadn't intended to watch the records room camera. He was reviewing the 3rd floor access logs because Petra had mentioned unusual activity on the archive terminal. But when he opened the footage, he saw the recording from that afternoon. Vivian sat between stacks of files, one hand turning pages, the other writing in the small notebook. She stopped, flipped back and forth between two sheets, compared them, turned to a third page. Then she wrote something down very quickly, closed the notebook, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. Grayson rewound it, watched it again. She had seen something, and she had written it down without telling anyone. Petra stood behind him, watching the screen with him. "She found something we missed for months," Petra said. Her voice was flat, but there was something underneath it, almost impressed, almost cautious. Grayson said nothing. He watched Vivian on the screen, the woman in 2 thin layers of clothing sitting in the dusty records room, turning files with the same hands that 2 days earlier had been digging through dumpsters for food. He didn't shut the camera off. He had no intention beyond looking, but he didn't turn it off. And maybe that, more than anything, was what said the most. Outside the window, Boston lay still in the cold night. Harbor lights flickered across the black water. 2 people at opposite ends of the city, one sleeping on the floor beside her daughter, one staring at a screen he couldn't bring himself to turn off, and neither of them yet knew that what was coming would be larger than anything either of them could face alone. No one survives alone. The 3rd week began normally. Vivian arrived at 6:45, as she did every day. She left Ruthie with Mrs. Calloway, went up to the 3rd floor, entered the records room, started where she had stopped the day before. She had already organized 2/3 of the archive. Mr. Fenwick didn't praise her, but he no longer looked at her with that assessing stare either. That was his version of praise. On Tuesday of that week, at 10:15 in the morning, the fire alarm went off. It wasn't a real fire. A drill. The entire building had to evacuate according to procedure. Employees poured into the stairwells, then lined up outside at the assembly point on the north side of the building. Vivian thought of Ruthie immediately. Mrs. Calloway was on the ground floor, and the evacuation procedure there was different from the one on the 3rd floor. She didn't know who would bring Ruthie outside. She didn't know whether the little girl would be frightened. She ran down the stairs instead of following the flow of employees. 18 minutes. She left her desk for 18 minutes. She left her access badge on the desk because she had gone in too much of a rush to think, thinking only of Ruthie, of the shrill sound of the alarm, and of her daughter perhaps, sitting alone in that small room on the ground floor, not understanding what was happening. When she got there, Mrs. Calloway had already brought Ruthie out to the assembly area. The little girl stood still, one hand clutching the hem of the older woman's pant leg, her eyes wide but not crying. Vivian held her. Ruthie said nothing. She only pressed her face into her mother's neck. 18 minutes. She left her desk for 18 minutes, and no one noticed anything unusual during those 18 minutes. 2 days later, Brennan Holt summoned her to a conference room on the 3rd floor. When she stepped inside, Brennan was already seated at the head of the table. Beside him sat Mr. Fenwick and another man Vivian didn't recognize, probably from internal security. On the table was a printed sheet. Brennan didn't invite her to sit. "We have a problem," he said. He slid the paper toward her. Vivian looked down. A list of files, internal financial records, confidential shipping routes, details of acquisition contracts not yet made public. Beside each file was an access timestamp, from 10:17 to 10:32 on Tuesday morning, and the terminal name, Archive Room, Floor 3, the place where she worked, alone. These files were accessed without authorization, Brennan said. His voice was flat, controlled, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who had decided on the conclusion before the conversation even began. "These are confidential council-level documents, information related to acquisitions and mergers. They aren't within the scope of your work." "I was assigned to sort vendor contracts," Vivian said. "Mr. Fenwick gave me access for that." "Mr. Fenwick gave you access to vendor records, not confidential council documents." "I didn't access those files." Brennan looked at her, the kind of look she had seen before. Not from him, from Travis. The look of a man who had already decided she was guilty and was only waiting for her to confirm it by falling apart. "Your access badge was logged at that terminal during that time window," he said. "In our line of work, unauthorized access to documents like these." He stopped, not because he hadn't finished the thought, but because he wanted the silence to do the work for him. The consequences aren't the corporate kind. Vivian heard the threat beneath the sentence. She wasn't stupid. She knew this building didn't operate like an ordinary company. She knew what our line of work meant, but she didn't look down, didn't look away, didn't retreat. Then, either the access log is wrong, or someone used my badge, she said. Her voice was even. Her hands were resting in her lap beneath the table, gripping the fabric of her pants, but her face showed nothing. Check the security footage from that day. I'll wait. Silence. Mr. Fenwick looked at Brennan. The man from security didn't move. Brennan didn't react at once, because he hadn't expected that. He had looked at her and seen a woman from the street, with no degree, no connections, no meaningful power. He had calculated that she would be afraid, that she would stumble over her words, that she would apologize, that she would cry, or better yet, that she would run. She did none of those things. She sat upright in the chair and looked straight into his eyes and said to check the footage, like someone who had been falsely accused enough times to know that the only reaction worth anything was the truth. We'll need to coordinate with security, Brennan said after a moment. That's fine, Vivian replied immediately. I want that. Something moved behind his eyes, very fast, then vanished. She stood up, because no one had told her to sit, which meant she didn't need anyone's permission to rise, and walked to the door. Her back straight, her steps steady. She didn't look back, but when she turned into the hallway and the conference room door closed behind her, both of her hands began to shake. That night, after Ruthie fell asleep, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed in the small studio and allowed herself to be afraid. 5 minutes. She counted them in her head. 5 minutes to let her hands shake, to let the weight settle in her chest, to let Brennan Holt's flat voice echo back through her mind with the words, "The consequences aren't the corporate kind," and to fully understand that she was inside a place where the rules didn't work like anywhere she had ever known. 5 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes, even though they were dry because she wasn't crying. It was only habit, wiping away anything that might become a sign of weakness before it had the chance to form. She stood up, took out the small notebook, sat at the kitchen table beneath the yellow light, and began to write. She wrote a timeline. Tuesday. 10:15, fire alarm. 10:16, left her desk, access badge on the desk. Ran down the stairs to the ground floor. 10:20, reached the assembly point, found Mrs. Calloway and Ruthie. 10:34, returned to the records room, badge still on the desk. 18 minutes. She recorded every minute clearly. Then underneath that, she added the 3 shipping manifests. Container number, date. 3 different destinations. 3 different weights. She copied them from the notebook exactly as she had written them during the first week. She didn't know what those numbers meant in the larger picture, but she knew they weren't right. And she knew that if someone was framing her because she knew too much, then what she knew belonged in the hands of the right person, instead of disappearing with her. She wrote until 1 in the morning. Read it over twice, folded it, slipped it into an envelope. The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. 6:30. Petra Voss was already at the reception desk. She was always there before anyone else in the building, as if she had nowhere else to be, or didn't want anywhere else at all. Vivian placed the envelope on the counter in front of her. This is a detailed statement of my movements on the day of the fire drill, minute by minute, along with some notes on irregular records I found while sorting the archive. Petra looked at the envelope, looked at Vivian. No one asked you to submit a statement. I know. Petra picked up the envelope. Her expression shifted, just slightly, the kind of shift that would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking closely, like the first time she had looked at Ruthie. Almost cautious, almost respectful. That afternoon, when Vivian went down to pick up Ruthie from Mrs. Calloway's room, the little girl was sitting at the small table drawing with crayons. Mrs. Calloway handed Vivian a piece of paper. She drew this morning. Vivian looked at the picture. Wax crayons on white paper. 2 figures, one tall and one small, standing inside a large rectangle. A house, a triangular roof, colored yellow, because Ruthie liked yellow, because it was the color of the sun, and the sun always came back. Mrs. Calloway said softly. I asked her if that was her house. She said, not yet, but Mama says it could be. Vivian looked at the drawing. 2 figures inside a house. The simplest dream in the world, drawn in crayons by a 3-year-old child who had slept in a car for a year. She folded the drawing carefully, placed it inside her shirt pocket, right over her heart. The next morning, Petra called her up to the 32nd floor, not to a conference room, to Grayson Mercer's private office. She had never been up here before. The room was large, spare, with glass walls overlooking the entire Boston Harbor. Grayson sat behind the desk. The envelope she had submitted lay open on the surface, the pages of her statement arranged side by side. He had read it. She sat down in the chair across from him. He looked at her. "You expected to be suspected," he said. "Not a question. I've been suspected before," she answered. "Without evidence. I learned how to create evidence for myself." He looked down at the page with the 3 shipping manifests: container number, date, destination, weight. Handwritten, clear, exact. The silence stretched. He knew what those numbers meant. She didn't, but she had seen them and written them down instead of ignoring them. "You could have said nothing about these," he said quietly. "I also could have said nothing about the briefcase," she answered. The room went very still. He looked at her, and she looked back, and for the second time since they had met in the ground floor lobby, something moved between them without words. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was recognition. It was a man accustomed to no one telling him the truth. Seeing a woman who didn't know any other way to live, except by telling it. "I need you to trust me," he said, "for the next 48 hours. Can you do that?" She looked at the man who had given her daughter a warm place to sleep, who had given her a job, who had listened when everyone else heard. Only silence. "Yes," she said. Margot Ellison arrived on a Thursday afternoon. No warning. No appointment. She walked into the main lobby the way someone walks into her own living room, her steps even, her back straight, dressed in white from head to toe, the kind of white only people who never have to worry about laundry dare to wear. She was 33 years old, the only daughter of the Ellison family in Philadelphia, one of Mercer's oldest allies. Whatever existed between her and Grayson was never called by any official word. Not fiancé, not lover. It was an arrangement both families understood without anyone ever putting it on paper. The ring she wore was on her right hand, not her left, because even symbols had to keep the proper distance. The employees in the lobby recognized her immediately. A few nodded. Petra came to meet her at the reception desk, exchanged a few brief words, then led her to the elevator. Vivienne was passing through the second-floor lobby at that moment, carrying a stack of files she needed to bring from the archive to accounting. She didn't know who Margot was, but Margot knew who she was, because as Petra led Margot past, Petra paused for half a second to nod in greeting to Vivienne. Only half a second. But Margot saw it, and she noted it. Vivienne didn't think any more about it. She kept going up to the 3rd floor, dropped off the files, and returned to the records room. But when she walked through the 2nd-floor hallway later that afternoon, Margot was standing by the window at the far end of the corridor, alone, as if she had been waiting. "You're Vivienne." Not a question. Vivienne stopped. "Yes." Margot turned to look at her. Intelligent eyes, cold, but not cruel. There was none of the hostility Vivienne had already grown used to from the 2 women during the first week. This was something else, more precise. "It won't last," Margot said. Her voice was light, almost without malice, carrying only certainty. His attention. Vivienne looked at her. "I'm not a project, aren't you?" Margot tilted her head. "Because he doesn't look at employees the way he looks at you." Silence stretched between them. Vivienne didn't know what to say, because she didn't know how Grayson looked at her. She had never looked back long enough to find out. "I'm not threatening you," Margot said, and for the first time, the certainty in her voice cracked slightly. "I'm telling you what I see. Because when his attention shifts, and it will shift, you'll have nothing to go back to. Make sure you're building something real before that happens." She turned and walked away down the hallway. The sound of her heels struck the stone floor in a measured rhythm. Vivienne stood there for a moment. Then she kept walking, because she didn't have time to stand still. That afternoon, Vivienne was kept in the records room later than usual. Mr. Fenwick told her to finish sorting one more batch of files before the end of the day. By the time she got downstairs to Mrs. Calloway's room, it was closed. Mrs. Calloway was no longer there. Vivienne stared at the closed door, and everything inside her went cold. She turned back toward the lobby, moved quickly, almost ran, and then she saw Ruthie. In the ground floor lobby, sitting on the large leather sofa, her feet not touching the floor, the one-eared teddy bear in her lap. eating a sandwich. Beside her, at the far end of the sofa, sat Grayson Mercer. He wasn't looking at Ruthie. He was reading a file in his hands. But the sandwich had been cut into small triangles, the way people cut them for children. The kind of cut an adult has to think about before making, has to pause and choose to slice diagonally instead of straight across, because children can hold triangles more easily. Vivienne stood at the entrance to the lobby, looked at her daughter, sitting beside the most powerful man in that building, eating a triangle sandwich, her legs swinging. She was hungry, Grayson said without looking up. Thank you. She told me the bear's name is Captain. Yes. She said her favorite color is yellow because that's the color of the sun, and the sun always comes back. Vivienne didn't say anything. Her throat tightened. She also said her mother sings to her every night, even when she's tired. Vivienne looked at her daughter, peanut butter at the corner of her mouth, bright eyes, and she asked softly, "She talked to you?" Because Ruthie hardly talked to anyone, not to Mrs. Calloway beyond a few words, not to the employees, not to other children, if there were any. The little girl kept her silence the way other people carried shields. Ever since she was 2. She did, Grayson answered. He looked up for the first time, and in that moment, Vivienne saw something on his face she couldn't name. It wasn't love. Too early for love. It was what comes before love. It was the realization that a 3-year-old child who stayed silent with the entire world had chosen to speak to him, and he didn't know what to do with that. At the same time, 3 floors above them, Brennan Holt sat in his private office reading the results of the background check he had ordered to be run on the name Vivienne Cross. There wasn't much. No active bank account. No fixed address. No formal employment record in the past 3 years. But there was one thing. A missing persons report for a child named Ruth Ann Wyatt, 3 years old. Reporting party. Travis Wyatt, former police officer in Portland, Maine. Person accused of kidnapping. Vivienne Cross Wyatt. Brennan read it twice. Then he smiled. For the first time in weeks, he picked up the phone and called a number in Portland. Not the police. A personal number belonging to Travis Wyatt. "Mr. Wyatt," Brennan said, his voice as calm as if he were calling to confirm an appointment. "I think I know where your wife and daughter are." The 48 hours Grayson had asked Vivienne to trust him weren't meant for waiting. They were meant for acting without being seen. Immediately after that meeting with Vivienne in his office, he handed the USB drive to an outside IT firm he had used for years. No connection to Mercer Maritime. No connection to anyone in the building. A team of digital forensics specialists in Cambridge, paid in cash, met in places without cameras. The kind of people he only called when he needed answers. No one else was allowed to know the questions to. The results came back in 18 hours, and every page pointed to the same man. Brennan Holt had been selling Mercer Maritime's shipping routes to Jorge Salazar in New York for 3 years. Not a few routes. The entire primary schedule. Departure times, destination ports, container codes, ship names, even details about shipments that never appeared on the official books. Everything Salazar needed to know exactly when Mercer was weakest, when cargo was moving through, when the port was empty. The payments for that information flowed through 3 shell companies registered in Delaware. Empty companies, no offices, no employees, only bank accounts and digital signatures. Over 3 years, $4,200,000 had moved through that system, from Salazar, through 3 layers of ghost companies, into a personal account Brennan had opened in the Cayman Islands under an assumed name. But that wasn't all. The USB drive also contained communication logs, encrypted messages between Brennan and a contact on Salazar's side. And in those messages, Grayson found the thing that made him set the documents down and sit very still for a long time. The night in Dorchester. The night he was ambushed. The night he lost the briefcase. The meeting with the source he had believed was real had been arranged entirely by Brennan. There was no source. No new information. Only a trap. The 2 men in that ambush hadn't been Salazar's men arriving by chance. They had been sent for one purpose. To get the briefcase. And if necessary, to make sure Grayson didn't come back. Brennan hadn't only been stealing, he had tried to kill him. Grayson sat in the dark office, city light slipping through the glass, and let that knowledge settle into him. 14 years. Brennan had been beside him for 21 years, had stood next to his father's coffin, had gripped his shoulder on the night he took over the family, had called him brother. 14 years, and all of it had been calculation. He opened the next section of the IT report. Terminal access logs. Vivienne's access card had been cloned on the very day of the fire drill. The cloning device had been linked to a visitor pass, the kind of single-use guest badge signed out by Brennan Holt's personal assistant. The 18 minutes Vivienne left her desk to go get Ruthie. 18 minutes was enough for someone to take her badge, copy it, and put it back before she returned. The confidential files accessed from the records room terminal hadn't been accessed by Vivienne. They had been accessed by a second device using a copy of her badge, operated from Brennan's private terminal on the 4th floor. During the same time window, the surface logs showed activity in the records room. Brennan had framed her, carefully, methodically, and coldly. And the 3 shipping manifests Vivienne had discovered. The 3 container numbers with 3 different destinations and 3 different weights matched exactly the shipments Brennan had redirected to Salazar. She hadn't known what she was finding, but she had found exactly the right thing. Grayson called Petra in. She stood in front of his desk, her back straight, her face unreadable. He set the documents on the desk. Her badge was cloned, he said. The accusation of unauthorized access was staged. Petra didn't look surprised. I checked the camera footage days ago, she said. Her voice was flat but clear. I saw Brennan's assistant near her desk during the fire drill. I was waiting for you to ask. Grayson looked at her. You knew. I suspected. The proof was your job. I only keep my eyes open. Silence. Grayson looked out at the window. Boston Harbor lay still in the night. Container ships lined up beneath yellow lights. The empire his father had died to build, the one Grayson had spent 14 years protecting, was being sold piece by piece by the man he had called brother. He turned back to Petra. Who has Brennan contacted in the last 24 hours? A number in Portland, Maine. Personal. We haven't identified the owner yet. Grayson nodded. Find out. Right now. Because he had a feeling that $4,200,000 and 14 years of betrayal weren't the worst things Brennan Holt had done. That evening, Vivienne left the building at 6:15. Ruthie was in her arms, the one-eared teddy bear wedged between the child's chin and chest, her head resting against her mother's shoulder. It was already dark. In February, Boston turned dark by 4:30. The wind off the harbor carried the smell of salt and machine oil, cold, damp, cutting through the 2 thin layers Vivienne wore. The path from Mercer Maritime back to the studio passed through an alley between 2 rows of warehouse buildings near the docks. In daylight, it was crowded with trucks coming and going. At night, it was empty, dark, with only one street lamp at the mouth of the alley and another at the far end. Vivienne walked that stretch every evening. She knew every puddle, every pothole, every crack in the concrete. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She had lived in darkness for a year, but tonight there was something different. She felt it before she saw it. The instinct of someone who had lived in fear long enough to know when the air changed. The car was parked in the middle of the alley. Not a warehouse truck, a sedan, black, lights off, engine running. She stopped, 10 meters ahead. The car door opened, and Travis Wyatt stepped out. Everything inside Vivienne stopped at once. Her heart, her lungs, her legs, her thoughts. 1 second, maybe 2. But in those 2 seconds, a year of running, a year of looking over her shoulder every time she turned a corner, a year of flinching whenever she heard a car door slam in a parking lot, all of it crashed down into one heavy mass on her chest. He was standing there, 10 meters away, heavy coat, both hands in his pockets, the stance she knew by heart, the ordinary stance. That was the most terrifying part. Travis was always at his most ordinary just before everything became its worst. Hi, Viv. His voice was light, familiar, the kind of voice he used when other people were watching. I've been looking everywhere for you. Ruthie felt it. Children don't need to understand words to recognize danger. They read their mother's body. And Vivienne's body in that moment was a wire pulled so tight it was about to snap. Ruthie tightened her arms around her mother's neck. Her 2 little hands locked on, and she trembled, not crying, not screaming, trembling in silence. The kind of trembling she had learned at 2 years old, standing in a bedroom doorway watching her father slam her mother's head into a wall. Silence was how Ruthie survived. And that silence, that shaking without tears, tore through Vivienne harder than any blow Travis had ever landed on her. She lowered Ruthie down, gently, set her behind her. Ruthie gripped the leg of her mother's pants and made no sound at all. Vivienne stood straight, looked at Travis. Give me my daughter, Travis said. He took one step forward. "She's not yours," Vivian said. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't know how it was possible that it didn't shake. "You won't touch her. Not tonight. Not ever again." Travis smiled, the smile she had seen hundreds of times, the smile before the storm. He took another step, and then the darkness behind him moved. Not dramatically. No loud footsteps, no shouting, just 3 figures separating from the shadows at the far end of the alley behind Travis's car, quiet, as if they had been standing there since before he arrived. Grayson Mercer stepped out first. 2 men followed behind him, large, expressionless, their arms hanging at their sides. Grayson didn't look at Vivian. He looked at Travis, and Travis turned around. The old police instinct recognized it immediately. Not the face, the type of man. The kind of man who, when he stands motionless in a dark alley with 2 others behind him, tells you that whatever you do next will decide whether you leave that alley walking or not. "You've got 3 seconds to get back in your car," Grayson said. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't threatening. Flat in the way only men who don't need to threaten ever sound. Travis looked at the 2 men behind Grayson, looked back at Grayson. "This is between me and my wife," Travis said. "She's not your wife, and you're standing on my docks." Grayson paused. 1. Travis didn't move. He was calculating. Vivian could see that on his face. The same face he wore every time he decided what she had done wrong that day. The same machinery of calculation behind his eyes. 2. Travis looked at Grayson for 1 more second, then looked at Vivian, looked at Ruthie hiding behind her mother's leg. And he made the choice cowards always make when they come face to face with someone stronger. He retreated, turned back to the car, opened the door, got in, started the engine, drove away. The red taillights disappeared at the end of the alley, but Vivian knew. She knew Travis. He wasn't giving up. He was only leaving because he didn't have the advantage yet. He would come back. He always came back. The alley fell quiet again. The sound of Travis's engine faded, then disappeared completely. All that remained was the wind off the harbor, the slap of water against the dock, and Vivian's breathing. Fast, shallow, the breathing of someone who had just kept herself from collapsing in front of her daughter. Grayson turned to look at her. She was still standing straight. Her back was still shielding Ruthie. Her arms hung at her sides, but her hands were clenched so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in front of Travis for 3 years, and she wasn't about to start now. "How long?" Grayson asked. 2 words, but she understood what he meant. Not how long since she had left. How long since all of it had begun. "Almost 3 years," she said. Grayson's jaw tightened. Slowly, she saw the muscle shift beneath his skin, saw the scar on his left wrist go pale as his fist tightened. The kind of reaction that belongs to someone forcing something enormous into a very small space inside himself. He didn't ask for details. Didn't ask how many times or how bad it had been or why she hadn't called the police. He didn't ask because he understood that there are questions whose asking is only another form of violence. "He won't come back," Grayson said. "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." She looked at him, and she understood. Not the details, not what he would do or how he would do it. She understood that when Grayson Mercer said, "I can," in that voice, with those eyes, with that stillness, it wasn't comfort, it was truth. And she believed him, not because she was naive, because she had lived long enough with a man who made empty promises to recognize when words were being carried by something heavier behind them. Silence. The wind moved between them. Then a small voice rose from behind her leg. "Are you going to hurt Mama?" Ruthie, standing behind Vivian's leg, her fingers still clutching the fabric of her mother's pants, her face tilted up toward Grayson with eyes no 3-year-old should ever have. Eyes that had seen men hurt her mother often enough to know that this was the question that had to be asked before any other question. Grayson looked down, and he knelt. The Mafia boss of Boston, the man who controlled everything that moved through this harbor, the man whose name could silence boardrooms and empty dark alleys, knelt on the cold concrete in an alley by the docks, so his eyes would be level with a 3-year-old child holding a teddy bear with one ear missing. "No," he said. "I won't hurt your mama." Ruthie looked at him. For a long time. 3 years old, but she was measuring him with something older than her age, with the instinct of a child who had learned to read adults not through words, but through the way they held their fists. Then Ruthie held out her hand. A tiny hand, fingers open, palm turned upward. Grayson looked at that hand. He had held many things in his life. Guns, contracts, the collars of traitors, his father's blood-soaked hand in the car that night in North End. But he had never held anything so light. He took Ruthie's hand, gently, as if he were holding something he was afraid might break. Vivian stood above them, looking down. Her daughter was holding hands with the most dangerous man in the city, in a cold, dark alley in Boston in February. And she felt something shift inside her that she didn't dare name. Not yet, but it was there. Don't turn this video off. What happened next changed everything. I'm serious. Stay right here. The next morning, at 9 o'clock, Brennan Holt walked into the conference room on the 32nd floor the way he did every Friday morning. He arrived exactly on time. Gray suit, coffee in hand, the calm face of a man who had worn a mask long enough to forget he was wearing one. Grayson was already seated at the head of the table. No coffee. No documents in front of him, only a thick stack of papers placed face down to his right. Petra stood in the corner of the room. 2 security men stood outside the door. Brennan glanced around. He recognized that the arrangement of the room was different from usual, but he sat down anyway, because Brennan Holt had survived for 14 years on the ability to never let it show that he noticed anything unusual. 14 years, Grayson said. No greeting, no introduction, just 2 words. Brennan set his coffee cup down, slowly. 14 years of what? 14 years standing beside me. Grayson turned the stack of papers over, 1 page at a time. He placed them on the table, one by one, like dealing cards. The first page, a diagram of the 3 shell companies in Delaware. Money flowing in and out. $4,200,000. The second page, logs of the shipping routes sold to Salazar. Dates, times, container codes, matching Mercer Maritime's internal schedules that only second-in-command level and above had the authority to access. The third page, encrypted messages between Brennan and Salazar's contact, decoded, readable. The fourth page, terminal access logs, Vivian's access card cloned from a visitor pass signed out by Brennan's assistant. The timestamp matched the day of the fire drill. The fifth page, details of the ambush in Dorchester, the fake meeting, the source that didn't exist, the 2 attackers, arranged by the same contact named in the Salazar messages. Brennan looked at each page. He said nothing. His face didn't change. Not yet. Grayson placed the last page on the table. The 6th page, phone call records. Brennan Holt's personal number calling Portland, Maine. Travis Wyatt's number. Time, 2 days earlier. Duration, 7 minutes. You sold shipping routes to Salazar, Grayson said. His voice was even, not raised. The stillness of a man who had known the truth for a long time and was only waiting for the right moment. You laundered $4.2 million through 3 ghost companies over 3 years. You arranged the ambush on me in Dorchester. You framed Vivian with a cloned card to make her the suspect. He paused. And you called her abusive ex-husband. You led a wife-beater to a woman and a 3-year-old child. The silence lasted a long time. Grayson said nothing more. He only looked at him and waited. Brennan sat still for 30 seconds. 40. Then the mask fell, not a collapse, a removal, slow, like taking off a suit jacket after a long day. The face underneath wasn't the face of a frightened man. It was the face of a tired one, tired of hiding. You don't understand, Brennan said, his voice rougher now. Truer. The price of standing next to a man like you. The inheritance, the counsel, the name. Everything belongs to you because you were born with the right last name. I've been here 21 years. I built half of what you call yours, and I'm still only second in command. Still only the man standing behind. I built what I have, Grayson said. And my father died so I could build it. Your father chose you, Brennan said. He always chose you. I was there first. I was better. But I didn't have the name. Grayson looked at him. So you sold me to Salazar. I took what I deserved. You led an abuser to a woman and a child. Brennan didn't answer that question, because there was no answer to it that wouldn't turn him into something even he didn't want to look at. Outside in the hallway, Through the slightly open door, Vivian stood with her back against the wall. She hadn't meant to listen. She had been on her way to the records room when she heard Brennan's voice carry out. She stopped, and she heard everything. Brennan saw her through the gap in the door. His eyes rested on her for a moment. Not hatred anymore, something closer to exhaustion. "You should have taken the money and left," he said to her. Vivian looked straight into his eyes. "And you should have been honest 14 years ago. We both would have been somewhere else by now." Grayson looked at Petra. "Call the FBI," he said. "Financial Crimes Division. Hand over everything." Petra nodded and stepped out. Brennan remained seated. The two security men entered. He didn't resist, didn't run, didn't beg. He only stood, fastened the button of his suit jacket out of a habit built over 21 years, and walked out between the two guards without looking back. That same day, Petra contacted Grayson's private attorney. The domestic abuse file was sent to the FBI, along with evidence that Travis Wyatt had filed a false report and a fraudulent missing persons report with the help of an old friend in the Portland Police Department. Travis was arrested at a motel in Providence, Rhode Island, on his way back to Boston. The warrant for Vivian was canceled. Her name was removed from the system. For the first time in 1 year, Vivian Cross was no longer a suspect in any database. She sat alone in the records room after hearing the news. Not happy. Not relieved right away. She only sat there and felt the weight she had carried for a full year suddenly lifted off her shoulders. And she didn't know what standing upright without it was supposed to look like. Margot Ellison left the next morning. There was no confrontation, no tears, no angry phone call at midnight. She appeared in the lobby at 9 o'clock that morning, wearing a cream-colored coat, her hair neat, pulling a small suitcase behind her, the kind of suitcase people carry when they know they won't be coming back, but don't want to turn leaving into an event. She stopped at the reception desk, said a few brief words to Petra. Then she removed the ring from her right hand. The ring she had worn for 2 years on her right hand instead of her left, because even symbols required the proper distance, and placed it on the counter. Gently, she didn't throw it, didn't shove it forward. She placed it there, as if setting down an answer she had thought through very carefully. Petra looked at the ring, looked up. Margot had already turned away. She walked out the door, stepped into the gray light of a Boston morning, and was gone before noon. There was no press release, no social media post, only the quiet departure of a woman who had looked directly at the situation, measured it with clear eyes, and made a choice about what she could and couldn't live with. There is a kind of courage in that not everyone recognizes. That afternoon, Grayson found Vivian in the staff lounge on the 3rd floor. She was standing by the window, looking out at Boston Harbor. Container ships moved slowly across the gray water. Cranes turned. The city stretched behind them, indifferent and alive at the same time, the way Boston had always lived, not caring who came and who left, only continuing. Grayson stepped inside. No suit jacket, none of the measured composure of the conference room. He looked like a man who had stayed awake all night, making heavy decisions, and had come here now to rest, if only for a moment, from the weight of them. He stood beside her at the window. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Boston moved beneath them. "Brennan's been turned over," he said at last. The FBI moved quickly. "We're beginning a full internal audit." He paused. "Your job is confirmed, officially. A position in operations oversight, if you want it." "I do." Silence. Then he spoke again, slowly, as if every word was heavy, and he was choosing carefully. "My father built all of this from nothing. He used to say loyalty wasn't a tactic. It was the foundation. That without it, everything else was just territory." He let out a breath. "After he died, I told myself I was living by that. I convinced myself I was doing it right. Then I watched the person closest to me sell me out for 3 years, and I didn't see it." He turned to look at her. And then a woman with nothing, absolutely nothing, walked through the snow to return something that wasn't hers. He paused. "You reminded me what the foundation was supposed to look like." Vivian looked at him. "I didn't do that for you," she said softly. "I know," he answered. "That's why it matters." Silence moved between them, gently this time, not heavily. "Ruthie asked me this morning if we're staying," Vivian said. Her voice was softer now. "She asked if this is our home." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd see." He almost smiled. Almost. Not quite. but closer than anything she had ever seen on his face. Vivian looked out at the city below, the city that had taken her in with empty hands. The streets where she had learned that hunger could be survived, that dignity was a choice, and that love was something you protected even when it cost you. She turned back to look at him. "Home isn't a building," she said carefully. "It's the feeling that you've finally reached a place where telling the truth is safe." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Then stay. Simple. Certain. Real." She nodded. And for the first time in a year, the weight she had been carrying changed. Not because someone had taken it away from her, but because at last someone was standing beside her and saying, "You don't have to carry it alone." The weeks passed. Then the months. Boston's winter gave way to spring, and spring carried with it something Vivian had forgotten the smell of. Warmth that didn't have to be begged for, didn't have to be searched for, only arrived, naturally, as if it had always belonged to this place. Ruthie discovered the backyard of the Harborside building, where an old maple tree had stood longer than any of the buildings around it. She gave it a name. She called it Henry. No one knew why Henry, but Ruthie said in a very serious voice that the tree looked like a Henry, and no one dared argue with a 3-year-old once she had made up her mind. Every afternoon, Ruthie brought Vivian little leaves like gifts and waited to be praised with the solemnity only a 3-year-old can carry. Vivian built her role in the company with the same care and precision she had used to restore order to the records room, quietly, without show, without asking for credit. She worked, and the work spoke for her. And between her and Grayson, everything grew the way real things grow, not in one dramatic moment, in 100 small ones. A conversation in the hallway that both of them meant to last 2 minutes, but stretched to 20, then 30. Then neither of them could remember when it had stopped being an interruption and become the best part of the day. A book she suggested he read, and he actually read it, then brought it back with notes in the margins he wanted to talk about, because he was the first man who had ever asked what she thought and truly wanted to hear the answer. An evening in the yard behind the building, Ruthie asleep between them on an old bench, her head in Vivian's lap, her legs across Grayson's, and neither of them moved for an hour because they both knew there are moments that break if you shift too quickly. She was the first person who told him plainly when he was wrong and didn't want anything from him afterward. It wasn't perfect. He worked too much, and she told him so. She carried too much alone, and he told her so. They disagreed about small things and talked until both of them understood. That was what made it real. The evening he told her he loved her, they were in the backyard. The first warm night of early summer in Boston, full of the sounds of the city doing what cities always do. He didn't build up the moment, didn't prepare it. He simply turned to her and said, "I love you. I'm saying it because I want to say it, not because the moment is right." She looked at him for a long time. "I love you too," she said. "I've been afraid of that for a while." "I know," he said. "So have I." And Ruthie, as if she had planned it in advance, called out from inside the house at that exact moment, "Mama?" They both laughed. Vivian stood and went inside to her daughter, her heart carrying more warmth than she had ever thought possible, and less fear than she had felt in years. People say that one honest choice can change an entire life. We don't believe that. Not when we're hungry. Not when we're cold. Not when we're sitting in a dead car in a frozen parking lot with everything we own in the back seat and a child trusting us with her whole little heart. In moments like that, honesty feels like a luxury. It feels like something people talk about from inside warm houses. But Vivian Cross sat in that car at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a Boston winter and chose it. She didn't choose it because it was easy. She chose it because her mother's voice was still inside her, because her daughter was watching, even in her sleep. And that choice, that quiet, private choice no one saw, became the door everything else walked through. A job, a home, safety for her daughter. A love she had stopped believing existed, not because the world rewards goodness, but because goodness, when it's protected honestly, becomes the foundation beneath everything that lasts. If you're carrying something heavy right now, if the road feels long and the cold won't let up, and you're wondering whether dignity is worth the price it asks of you, I want you to know this. It is. Not immediately, not loudly, not in the way we imagine when we're desperate. But it is. Because the things built on honesty don't fall easily. May your honest choices find you. May they open doors you had stopped believing were there. May the right person see you exactly as you are, and may everything you've carried through the cold finally find its way home. If this story touched you in any way, I truly want to hear what you felt. How did this story strike you? Did it remind you of someone in your real life? Was there a moment that made you stop and think? Please share it with me in the comments, from the deepest place in your heart, because every comment you leave gives us the strength to keep telling stories like this every single day. If you think this story deserves it, please press the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every single day. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.